Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamaker Review. It's Tuesday, the 25th of August, and it is 8:30 a.m. Today, I want to address the things about the City of London in the public space now that I think are true. But my main contention is that the City of London is not the overarching concern for the world now. And I think it offers camouflage for whatever the real party of concern is. I don't seek to name it per se. I see elements of it. You could say that I can see tentacles of it. I think that the Temple of Solomon project is a tentacle of it, but I can't see the body of the squid or the octopus or whatever it is. I just feel relatively certain that to blame all the problems of globalization and the direction of the world at this juncture in history on a 1 square mile constituency or municipality or sovereign entity, if you will, called the City of London is facile and naive and preventing the deeper thinking that will allow us to come up with what the real problem is and identify it. And I am, in some ways, ashamed of some of the podcasters that or who have produced respectable content in the past who have, fallen for this nonsense. So I want to begin by taking a look at the three countries in the Five Eyes that are tentacles of the City of London. And those are, of course, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. Each one of these countries, in their own way, is kind of pathetic. And because they've been infantilized and never really created as nation states, but rather cultural outposts of the City of London at economic and political and policy directive levels since their inception, with perhaps a little bit changing for Canada after World War II, but not much at all, right? So let me begin by saying I absolutely loathe the political class of London. Loathe them. If I could get away with it, I'd slit all their throats. I'm only half joking. I don't really know why I loathe them. I guess it's because they walk around with their stiff upper lip and their despicable class structure. The monarchy, which I detest and have always detested. Queen Elizabeth, all of these people. It's antithetical to meritocracy. Okay? So I guess at my core, I'm something of a libertarian, although I don't necessarily agree with all the tenets of libertarianism. But I do know that the best society you're going to have is the one that values merit. Okay? It's racist to say that, the Chinese are dominating all the good engineering positions at top universities in Canada and the United States. It's racist because it projects race onto an issue that should have no race associated with it. they're in those positions by merit, because no culture on this planet raises children with more discipline towards academia and studying than the Chinese. And the Indians are a close second. And this evolution comes about in societies that have been massively oppressed or undercapitalized or short on social currency, where currency is God's currency, opportunity. Social currency is the ability to change your station in life, to go from a peasant farmer pushing a mule, a yoke tethered to it, through a rice paddy in China somewhere, or to a barefoot farmer tending 5 acres in northern China in Punjab province. When you work that hard for generations, you understand the value of God's currency. You understand the value of opportunity. And because these societies are unbroken in terms of the central unit, which of course is the family, not a big mystery if you've been listening closely to the Telemanker Review, it invokes in the parents and the grandparents an extreme discipline toward the emerging generations, because they carry the generational wisdom to understand the value of opportunity. And of the 4 countries that were created based on emigration from the United Kingdom, the only country that even comes close to understanding that is the United States. And that is because the United States took the uncommon step of descending into an absolutely bloody and barbaric reformation of social order. Whether it be the westward expansion, the migration of settlers to Oregon and Washington and Colorado and Montana to farm and cattle graze. And if you want to understand the courage that took, just look at some of Taylor Sheridan's television, like 1883 and 1923. And it tells the history. And although it was brutal and dangerous and murderous and lawless, out of it formed a true country. By separating the atom of social cohesion, the Americans reconstituted a completely new entity and consciousness. And it's definitely worth preserving. And it's definitely worth our admiration, that being the admiration of people on the outside looking in. And if you can't understand that, I can't help you. It's a deficit in your heart. There's a certain amount of emotion required and feeling required and understanding of life required to understand what I'm saying right now. So now we come back to New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. And today I want to focus on Canada. And I'm not going to use my own words. I'm going to use the words of a Substack publisher that goes under the title of Brave New Normal. And this is an article written by Jason James. And I think it's just brilliant. I'll stop and add my commentary where I see fit, but for the most part, I'll let it speak for itself. And it comes on the heels of the increasing trade war between Canada and the United States, which I predicted some months ago on this podcast. I didn't necessarily predict a trade war, but I said that the United States would have to deal with Canada because Canada was letting China in the back door. And it's gotten worse than that. Canada has been caught rebranding Chinese products to sell into the US market at a time when the Trump administration is vehemently against Chinese products entering the American market outside of the tariff structure he created for China. So, in a sense, this is a kind of a proxy war. And Canada, to its absolute shame, is betraying the greatest benefactor and friend it has ever had in the United States. No matter what you think of the Trump administration, you cannot overlook the history of Canada and the United States. America's Canada problem. When a welfare state goes rogue. Who are you, and why should you exist? Whatever country you're in right now, ask yourself that question. If you're an American, you probably have a very ready answer. You don't have such a ready answer if you're Australian, Canadian, or New Zealander. So who are you and why you should you exist was the question underlying Trump's 51st state proposal to Canada. And the truth is, we Canadians don't know the answer. And you can see it in the way we throw ourselves into hysterics when confronted with questions surrounding our national identity. It's an instant overreaction, and it's driven by the humiliation of being exposed. An overreaction so extreme, it compels us to elect a globally infamous net zero fraudster and central banking con man as our prime minister. All in a frantic effort to insulate ourselves from our own reckoning. This is all true. This is the Canada we know. We've been putting it up for 3 centuries. We've just been putting up this storefront, putting up this idea that we're a nation. I will say this, our contribution to World War II was stellar, given our population and our resources. We were, in fact, the most feared land force in World War II. The highest number of German desertions would occur when the command structure would let the soldiers know they would be engaging within 72 hours because there was an army marching upon their position. And when word got out that that army was a Canadian, this would prompt the highest level of desertions in the German army. Canadians were absolutely feared in World War II. That's a story that's never really been told. We don't have a Hollywood in Canada. We don't have a Steven Spielberg to do Band of Brothers for us. And although most of the veterans of that war are almost dead, almost all dead, if you ever had chance to speak to any of them, German or otherwise, they would tell you the same thing, that Canadians were the most feared. We were very brave. This was a different generation. I think farmers always make the best soldiers. because soldiering at that time was really just a toil on the land. It was long marches, it was heavy packs on your back. Very natural sort of thing. City boys don't do as well. But aside from that one example, World War II, I can't think of any other examples at this moment that contradict the thesis I'm giving you on Canada today, supported by Brave New Normal. I take no pride in saying these things. My family has been in Canada since 1798. The McDonalds came over on the boats like everybody else, settled and farmed. You could say that some of it has been deliberate suppression. We did produce the best fighter jet in the world in the 50s, the Avro Arrow, and it was suppressed by we were asked to shelve it or turn the technology over to the Americans, and they would take the lead. So it's not that the innovation wasn't there and the willingness to work wasn't there. It's just that we've always been beside this population giant in the form of the United States, which was the favorable locale for a lot of immigrants because Canada is brutally cold and nobody, very few people, want to live in a brutally cold place. Unless, of course, they're the proxies of abusive aristocracies in Europe. The very aristocracies that the American Revolution took on straight up and won. And the British, the City of London, they never forgot that. And in many ways, the thesis emerging now about Trump's battle with the City of London has many, many valid points and a valid foundation. The only thing I'm rallying against is that this is the absolute binary, single, no gray, black and white solution to what Trump is doing now. That part is ridiculous. I still think that our true enemy is not yet seen clearly. Okay? Now, getting back to Mark Carney, the spineless little dweeb that we elected for Prime Minister. Elbows up was a promise to continue defying reality. Elbows up was the expression Mark Carney gave in the election. And, it's a hockey expression. It means play tough hockey. And so we were going to take America on. And as the author here correctly notes, this was a promise to continue defying reality. A gold-plated slogan for those committed to maintaining a detrimental distance from the real world. Cognitive dissonance, which I think perfectly characterizes Canada. Canadians don't live in reality, right? Every single aspect of the progressive agenda is everywhere in Canada now. It's like the worst aspects of the Biden-Harris administration times 2 or 3. You guys don't know about this if you don't live in Canada. Okay. Mark Carney and the Liberals, they knew exactly how to placate Canadians in the assurance that they would never have to justify their entitlement as a welfare state of 40 million people. Carney and his Trudeau leftovers guaranteed the luxury of ignorance, but under one condition. That ignorance would extend to himself and the transnational marauders at Brookfield. It was a silent agreement that fit perfectly with the Canadian ideal. Canadians don't believe in anything. That's the problem. It's always been the problem. But it's one we never had to confront until now. Prior to 2025, we had an armored eagle hovering overhead, outfitted with Patriot missiles and monster trucks and stuffed crust and fucking freedom. We let the Americans do the dirty work while Canadians reap the benefits. When Dick Cheney and the neocons decided to light the Middle East on fire, we were right there dousing Iraq with gasoline. But when popular opinion turned against the campaign to flatten Afghanistan into a Walmart parking lot, Canada raised the rainbow flag and wrapped itself in a keffiyeh. It's understandable that eventually the United States would grow tired of our stunts. We were the co-conspirator who dumped the bodies and then snitched in exchange for immunity. When the transgressions of the American empire are rightfully criticized, Canada is rarely mentioned, and we've intentionally minimized our accountability despite being the greatest beneficiaries of the American machine. Platitudes define our national character. Trudeau exemplified this perfectly. Everything was a platitude with that guy. You know, it's worth looking up the word platitude here because you really have to understand the word at its core. A lot of times we use words, but we don't really know what they mean. What does platitude mean? It's a trite, dull, or overused remark or statement, especially one with a moral content that has been used too often to be interesting or thoughtful. While a platitude is typically true on a basic level, it feels shallow or unhelpful because it lacks originality, depth, or practical value in the moment. Yeah, 100%. 100%. And Trudeau was the king of these platitudes. We'll, as Canadians, will cling to whatever social cause has captured the Western consciousness, and we'll squeeze until every drip of virtue has pooled in our glass. We're very, very invested in the appearance of benevolence and nothing more. We want our outward image to project compassion, equality, and tolerance. It doesn't matter that our free healthcare system is crumbling, or that our middle class carries more household debt than any in the developed world, or even that we've either sold our most profitable industries to China or hamstrung them to the point of insolvency. We'll just offer state-assisted suicide to people with treatable diseases and alleviate the pressure on our system. We'll import low-wage workers to artificially boost our gross domestic product, while the middle class sinks further into poverty. We'll mandate eco-friendly alternatives, although we have no feasible method of generating the energy necessary to power them without oil and gas. What matters is the platitude. Are we on the right side of the current issue? Did we import enough of the third world to negate our white privilege? Did we lead the fight against climate change? Did we trans the kids? And when those kids become mutilated, sexless adults with irreversible PTSD, did we offer them MAID? Canada was fertile ground for woke neoliberalism. Our love of platitudes made our nation a perfect receptacle for communist propaganda, since it's within the facade of superior moral integrity that the teeth of authoritarianism lock into a culture without an authentic identity. The United States survived their cultural revolution because they're rooted in real principles, ethics that are slowly killing the woke ideological parasite, because those principles are embedded in the American DNA. Woke was eventually going to hit the wall of the Constitution and Bill of Rights. These are the documents Americans live and die by, the foundation from which the entire American project was assembled. It's written into every atom of the American body, and it has an inoculating effect against foreign ideas. The stars and stripes are a natural shield against the hammer and sickle. And that flag carries an enduring legacy because it was born out of struggle. First, a struggle against the British monarchy, then a struggle against itself, then a struggle against external tyrannies. When Americans raise their flag, it has meaning. It stands for a belief in something better, in independence, in liberty. No matter which corner of the country they're from or the color of their skin, the American flag represents an ideal their ancestors died to erect, improve, or protect. Now, we Canadians, we don't understand this level of devotion because we don't share the same foundation. Canada was established as a British colony. We're the other side of the American coin, a nation without a desire for sovereignty, a culture created around a deference to authority with a severe aversion to rebellion. The difference is evident in what these countries produce. The United States is the world leader by nearly every metric, whereas Canada is distinguished by mediocrity, if we're even mentioned at all. Since the country's inception, we've been attached to a larger power, first Britain, and then the United States in the post-World War II era. We are the perpetual sucker fish, affixed to the backs of imperial whales. And therefore independence has always been an alien concept in our collective mind. So when Donald Trump justifiably asks why the United States continues to subsidize Canada with virtually no benefit to the American cause, Canadians come untethered because it's incomprehensible to think that our patron empire would ask us to provide something of material value in return. We'd never been faced with a demand like this, and from Mein MAGA Führer of all people. How dare he look at the numbers and question the billions his country spends on Canada's national security? That's just how we operate. We're socialists, after all. If America wants the esteem of calling Canadian Marxists a friend, then that's a privilege they have to pay for. Now, the US-Canada trade war is less about bullishness and more about imbalance. The United States purchases roughly 70% of Canada's exports, while Canada purchases just 18% of American exports. The United States has a population of 400 million, Canada 40 million. Now, when you consider the very large gaps in both purchasing percentage and population density, Canada has a clear runaway trade advantage over the US. We've profited tremendously from America's huge consumer market and moved almost none of that capital back into the American economy. At the same time, the United States sends additional billions into Canada through defense agreements like NORAD, while Canada downsizes its military and relies on the US to cover the tab. And adding insult to injury, Canada has engaged in an increasingly invasive relationship with China that became a leading concern for the United States somewhere between the Bush and Obama administrations. A relationship that culminated in an invitation from Justin Trudeau's government for the People's Liberation Army to run military exercises on Canadian soil. It wasn't until the United States intervened that the exchanges ended abruptly, and for good reason. China is already the active aggressor in a hybrid war with the United States that could turn kinetic at any moment. Canada is as much a launching pad for China into the US as Ukraine is a launching pad for NATO into Russia. And we see how that's working out. But none of this really sticks between the ears of Canadians. Now, part of the magic of being Canadian is in the uncanny ability to maintain ignorance of anything that conflicts with our government-funded worldview. We have a juvenile understanding of ourselves and our place in the global dynamic. Our seething bitterness for the American success story has festered for decades. And Trump's reality check only served to turn up the temperature on a resentment that was always at the edge of consuming us completely. We're jealous of the United States. Now it manifests in behavior like booing their national anthem or removing American products from liquor stores. Behavior that is as humiliating as it is petty. We're incapable of reacting any other way because that's who we are at our core. Bitter, resentful children. Again, undeveloped people. Character develops through adversity. Canada took the easy path. Colony of Great Britain. Yes, Queen, yes, King. And right as Canadians were spinning into their anti-American delirium, Mark Carney arrives with China on his heels. Elbows up. It wasn't just a matter of cutting off our nose to spite our face. It was a full decapitation to prove that we were better at killing ourselves than Trump could ever be. We didn't resolve to raise our standards and transform Canada into the economic powerhouse it always had the potential of being. No, we retreated into our socialist cave and began reaching for a new sponsor, first in the EU and then in China. Strategic partnership. You can see the confusion in the faces of American officials whenever Canada enters the conversation. It's like they're bewildered by the neighboring tribe of Bronze Age Aboriginals challenging their space age weapons to a standoff. They know what they have to do, but they don't want to do it. If it were any country other than Canada, we'd already be an American gas station. Trump's tariffs were part of the America First effort to inject some adrenaline back into U.S. manufacturing. He correctly identified a problem. America is importing far more than it produces. And the answer to that problem was to put tariffs on virtually all imports the United States is capable of producing themselves. And this levels the playing field for American manufacturers. Now, COVID brought global trade to a halt. And a part of America First meant investing in American businesses so that if an event of such magnitude ever happened again, the American people would have security. The requests made of Canada by the Trump administration were perfectly rational. Close the border, slow the flow of immigration, end the fentanyl crisis, and increase defense spending. But Canadians, we can only see these issues one way. And that way is through a socialist lens where Canada is forever a victim of American imperialism and is entitled to eternal financial pacification. On our frozen Arctic island, there are no deals, just constant handouts and wide open access to American markets. In the past, this lopsided relationship worked because Canada had an infinite supply of oil and gas, the one crucial resource the United States can't produce fast enough. But with the taps turned off in our descent to net zero, we really don't have much else to offer. Now, the US has landed in a compromising position. Canada has aligned itself with China, and China is the nation that most threatens America's status as the superpower. With every step forward in this strategic partnership, or New World Order, as Mark Carney has termed it, the Americans have to decide where the line is and how far Canada can cross before they act. The 51st state, in a crude way of describing a complex scenario full of intricate variables. The United States definitely does not want to absorb 40 million socialists, but on the same note, cannot afford to have the Chinese Communist Party on their doorstep. As Canada becomes serially hostile to American interests and progressively welcoming to Chinese incursion, the United States has only two options: negotiate us off the ledge before we jump, or let us jump and do what every empire has done when an enemy arrives on their border. As time goes on, and as the elbows up fervor crystallizes in the Canadian consciousness, it becomes more apparent that option two will be the probable outcome. Trump spent the first year of his second term cutting China off at critical choke points in all corners of the world. And now in their second year, his administration is purging China on the American continent. That's what Venezuela was about, folks. And China's here. They're poking around all the time. Costa Rica's kind of kicked them out now, too. Right now, their attention is focused locally and on Latin America, where drug cartels work in conjunction with the Chinese Communist Party-sponsored organized crime to wage chemical war against the United States through fentanyl and other substances. Once those groups are sufficiently crushed, the American cannon will swivel north, where China's political espionage operations are headquartered. Then the question will be asked of us one last time: who are you, and why should you exist? Canadians would be best served by looking within themselves and preparing an answer. So I found that a very interesting article when I read it this morning, and it congeals perfectly with what I've been saying for some time now, months, if not close to a year. I think it's despicable what Canada is doing. Absolutely despicable. I think Canada is a despicable country. I really do. And I'm not trying to offend my Canadian listeners. We were given one of the largest resource bases in the world, if not the largest. Water is becoming a critical commodity. We have more fresh water in Canada than anywhere else in the world, and in fact, we have about a third of it. We have everything needed to create a battery industry, but we farm out all the work to China and just take a commission like a third world country. It's ridiculous. It always has been ridiculous. Canada is a ridiculous country, and it has to change. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.